Hello and welcome to Africa Here and Now, the conversation you've always wanted to have about the continent. I'm Martine Dennis. Today, a pivotal moment in South African politics. The president calls it a moment of fundamental consequence that requires extraordinary leadership. Has Cyril Ramaphosa got what it takes? South Korea eyes up Africa both for its critical minerals and its diplomatic influence. So what does the G7 meeting in Italy want with a handful of the continent's leaders? Last stand in Darfur, the battle for control of Western Sudan's underway, with almost 3 million people facing shelling and starvation. And why is Nigerian TV provider being forced to give its customers a month for free? As ever, we're joined by Patrick Smith, the editor of Africa Confidential, and Donu Kogbara, who is a writer and broadcaster who's in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Together, we will try to unpack the issues. Starting with South Africa, Oyama Mbandla is joining us. He is a businessman, he's a lawyer. He left South Africa, I think, at the age of 17, Oyama, right, to join the ANC in exile. And as such, therefore, you've got a rather interesting view, up close and personal, of how the ANC has managed to, A, lose its majority, and the kind of position that Cyril Ramaphosa is in right at this moment.
Indeed. Well, the ANC lost its majority because it has misgoverned this country for the last 15 years. Unemployment is at 42%. We have load shedding. We have something new called water shedding. We had a social explosion in July 2021, driven mostly by hopelessness and poverty. We have crumbling infrastructure, failing public education and public health. So the ANC was due for a major shellacking, and it got it.
Now, Ramaphosa himself has called this a moment of fundamental consequence that requires extraordinary leadership. Has he got what it takes? Can he manage? Can he walk the line?
We're praying that he does. Ramaphosa hasn't shown himself to be a decisive leader in the 6 years he has been in power. It's his last term as the Republic's president. It's his last term as the ANC's president. He's got nothing to lose. And lest we forget, he birthed this new dispensation. He is the person Mandela sent to negotiate with the Nationalist Party that produced the democratic breakthrough of 1994. I would imagine he doesn't want a crack up of what he birthed to occur under his watch.
And what does the future complexion of this government of national unity, what does it look like to you at this point? We understand that by the end of the week, we might be completely overtaken by events, but it's a kind of Faustian pact, isn't it, for Ramaphosa? He's damned if he doesn't, damned if he doesn't.
It's a labyrinth, a maze, if one can call it. The most obvious thing to do is to tie up with the DA and the IFP. That gives Ramaphosa 66% votes in parliament. On top of that, it would mean this trio would be able to govern KZN, and he could give that to Ingata. IFP is a Zulu province. And then he could take Gauteng, that is the ANC take Gauteng. So on all measures, this would be the best arrangement for him to do. And what the IFP gives him is also stability. You won't have Malema or Zuma, for that matter, collapsing government every now and then has become Malema's want. Because with 66%, you have a stable government. And most importantly, with the DA in that arrangement, it will reassure capital. We need capital when we're at 42% unemployment.
Oyama, where does this leave the EFF and MK as an opposition grouping then? Because if the DA and IFP go into a formal coalition or this government of national unity type setup with the ANC, then the official opposition then becomes Jacob Zuma's MK at P and the EFF, right? How disruptive can they be in that role in a new parliament?
Of course, they will be disruptive. That's all they know. So the math doesn't work for them because all the other parties are joining the government of national unity. But I must say this, it will take a leap of faith for the ANC to do what it must, which is to combine with the DA and the IFP in a government of national unity. The DA has been the ancestral foe of the ANC since the dawn of liberation, you know. So the idea that the ANC has to rely on the DA for its salvation really bothers ANC folk.
What would that mean in policy terms? Could the DA then say, well, you've got to speed up the privatization, sell off the power company, sell off the transport company and stuff like that? Do you see that really happening in South Africa?
Well, remember the ANC was already on that path, you know, what they call Operation Vulindlela. This was already a reforming state. And the DA has come out and said, we support Vulindlela, we support all kinds of things that the ANC has already put up or was already doing, perhaps without the deliberate speed that it needs. Because as I say, they've got a namby-pamby president, you know. But in terms of the policy posture of the ANC was already inclining to what the DA would support.
And can I ask you then about that internal balance of the ANC? Because those who are fundamentally opposed to any kind of relationship with the DA will be very, very hacked off. I mean, is there a chance, therefore, that the rifts that are already in the ANC will widen and perhaps even see deserters moving across the aisle to perhaps MK?
Yes, I think that will happen indeed. And that should happen. I think it's desirable, you know. I was reading something from Oliver Tambo that he delivered in his closing address at Morogoro, where he talks about some of the people who were critics or his adversaries have defined themselves outside the ANC tradition. So he says, this means we'll be smaller, but the load will be lighter. So let them go and join Jacob Zuma and Malema. And the liberalizing wing of the ANC will do what the country needs at this moment, which is to drive economic growth, fix crumbling infrastructure, the hospitals, public education, and most importantly, a rededication to fealty to the Constitution.
You're all talking about what's going to happen in future, all these alliances, national unity government possibilities. Oyama, why has the ANC descended to the level of so many African governments and failed spectacularly to prove that, we can actually run the show properly somewhere? I mean, why is there so much corruption?
Well, my sister, the moment of rupture happened in Polokwane 17 years ago, where the ANC decided to commit harikiri, suicide, and jettison Thabo Mbeki.
I love Thabo Mbeki,
who lived in Lagos, so you would love him. He lived in Lagos between the years 1976 and 78. He was the ANC's chief representative there, you know. But at any rate, Thabo Mbeki and Nelson Mandela, that double act, had been doing a great job that some of us perhaps, didn't recognize at the time. This economy was growing at 3.6% between 1994 and 2008, which was when Mbeki was defenestrated. 6 million jobs were created. So the notion that this was a jobless growth is a fallacy. I know 6 million jobs were not enough, to deal with our high levels of unemployment. Unemployment remained at 29% even under Mbeki, even though The last 3 years were growing at 5%, something this country had not seen since 1965. And for 2 consecutive years, we had a surplus, something this country has not seen since its founding in 1910, the Union of South Africa. The black middle class quintupled. We got out of junk status that the Boers had plunged us into because of sanctions and apartheid. The reward for all this good work was this defenestration. The ANC chose madness. I always describe, the 15 years between 1994 and 2009 as a golden age of our republic. Camelot, if you like, but Camelot without a symphony, because Mbeki was not a symphonic dude. He didn't sing and gyrate. Zuma did. And the masses, or rather the delegates of the ANC, lost their mind and chose a gyrator instead of a person who was pursuing good policies for our country. So that was the moment of fracture, my sister. I call it in my book, those that the gods sought to destroy, they first made mad. It was a moment of madness akin to Brexit, akin to the Americans electing Trump.
Well, Oyama, it's almost like you and I are soulmates. We're spiritual twins. Everything you've said, I totally agree with. I mean, I think the defenestration, as you so poetically put it, of Mbeki was one of the greatest acts of self-harm that has taken place on this continent. And I think, Zuma reminds me of a Nigerian politician. I mean, honestly, he fits in so well here. He's a gyrator. It's all about superficiality. And you have to ask yourself, why do the African masses like people who play that kind of game?
Is it just the Africans, though? Because it's that kind of politician, that with the populist touch, that is taking power all over Europe now.
Trump, Orban, Maloney, these are the people who are making hay.
I agree with that sentiment. I think there is a populist wave sweeping the world, There's some physical attraction about them. Trump, Zuma, Mbeki was a stern taskmaster, which is what I say. I say we had a Camelot, a symphony, If he had lightened up a bit, danced a bit, but most importantly and consequentially, if he had not alienated Nelson Mandela would have stopped the peasants with their pitchforks from storming Mbeki's grand manor.
Okay, now we've been talking a lot about the past, Oyama, which I really appreciate. But what I would like to know now, and it involves, in fact, Mr. Mbeki himself, what's going forward? What is the solution, if you like? Because what we're looking at the moment is a very, very disjointed, polarized country, right? With a very, very low turnout in these elections, signifying an awful lot.
We need a national dialogue, which Mbeki has called for, and it will take place because Ramaphosa has said he supports it. In fact, after Mbeki issued the clarion call on the 30th of April, within an hour, Ramaphosa responded with alacrity to say, I support it. So we'll have this national dialogue, which will hopefully reinvigorate the soul of our nation, the democratic spirit. Why is the youth of our country not participating in the political project? I mean, only about 30% of them bother to vote. And this is the largest cohort in our country. So something has gone wrong. Whether you're talking about the generation of Nelson Mandela in their 20s, who took over the ANC from the sclerotic leadership of Dr. A.B. Xuma, whether you're talking about the Black consciousness movement of Steve Biko, it was young people. The people who rose against the imposition of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in 1976 on June 16th were young people. The people who drove the freedom struggle were young people. So it's sad and a tragedy when at a moment of difficulty and fracture in our republic, young folk, the youth, are missing in action. But the national dialogue, I hope, will bring them back into the political project.
Our thanks to Oyama Mbandla, author, as he's mentioned, of The Soul of a Nation. On the website, we'll put a bit more detail. So, Patrick, what you and I need to talk about is a whole swathe of African leaders making it all the way to Seoul in South Korea, the capital, of course, and only a handful of African leaders have been selected to go to Giorgia Meloni's G7 bash in Italy later this week. What's going on? What did the South Koreans want? And what could Giorgia Meloni want?
Well, I think the South Koreans are pretty clear. They see a massive opportunity in Africa, $3 trillion of GDP, 30% of the world's critical minerals on the continent. Some history helps because in 1960, South Korea GDP per capita was lower than either Ghana or Nigeria. Today, they're the 13th biggest economy in the world, and they're a major supplier of high-tech hardware and software to the world. So they see a huge market in Africa. They're pushing their Hyundai cars. They want to make those Hyundai cars overwhelmingly electric. So they want to push those electric cars, join China. And they have a sort of bigger vision, which is that their development model is the one that Africa should take more seriously. Forget the West, because the West industrialized hundreds of years ago, so they're completely out of date. Forget China, because it's a sort of top-down authoritarian model. And the South Koreans are saying, well, we've got a kind of human-centered model. It's all about technical training and education. They say our emphasis is on human development. So that message sounds absolutely great. But you've really got to ask yourself how committed South Korea is and how able is it to compete with either the US or China, which are putting tens of billions of dollars into their Africa programs. But it's certainly a start. And President Yul met with 23 African leaders in the space of 2 days. I guess those meetings weren't too in depth, but he had them nevertheless. And as you rightly point out, the far right leader, that is inheritor of Mussolini's political ideology, Giorgia Meloni, is only managing to meet with 5 African leaders this week. So it's a slight difference there.
And who are the 5 that Giorgia Meloni has invited to her G7 party?
I guess President Bola Tinubu tends to go to most of the parties. Certainly, Kenya's William Ruto is going to be there. Certainly, Rwanda's Paul Kagame is going to be there if Felix Tshisekedi from Congo doesn't turn up. So I think it'll be the usual suspects. Yeah, not many surprises. And of course, the Tunisian autocrat Kais Saied, who is doing so much to stop people getting to boats across the Mediterranean. And that so much includes dumping people in the middle of the desert without any water and food. So all that is part of the package. And it's a good commentary on the state of Euro-African relations at the moment.
All right, Patrick, thank you for that. Now we're going to speak to Walid Madiba, who's a governance and international development expert. And Walid, thank you for talking to us. You're a Sudanese, of course, and we wanted to talk about the situation in your country, in particular in the West at the moment, where it's being described as the last stand for El Fasher, capital of Darfur province. Tell us what's going on there and why this potentially could impact the final outcome of this civil war.
Thanks, Martin, for having me. Actually, if looking back the political history of Darfur, it was invaded many times in the course of 140 years by colonial powers, be it Turks, British, or Egyptians. And in all of those 3 trials, they were aided by centrist elites from the northern part of the country, whom I call Riverian elites. And as a matter of fact, they galvanized their grip in Darfur in the course of the last 68 years since independence. And even though the Darfur is a very resourceful place, it's the place mostly densely populated. Darfur has about 7 million human beings, and it's the size of France. Not to forget that it's very rich in minerals and animal resources. So rather than developing the infrastructure in the direction of moving the colonial economy into some sort of a national economy, which will give Darfur and Kordofan and the rest of the periphery a good foothold, they continued manipulating the economy of the country to the level that it reached a state where I call it an apartheid state, where your race determines your position in the society and in the economy. Some scholars, some Sudanese scholars disagree with me, but that's my stand.
At this particular juncture, there is a battle royal apparently underway in Darfur, and it's being depicted, Walid, as being essentially a battle for the control of the western part of the country.
It's a battle for the control of the country itself, because the moment Darfur falls in the hands of the RSF, then the whole Darfur and the western part of the country will be totally decolonized, and they are going to move towards the northern part of the country, Shimalia and Nahr al-Nil. So when you look at al-Fashir from a geostrategic point of view, if you control al-Fashir, then you control access to Chad and you control access to Libya, and you left your back supported, and you can move comfortably towards the northern part of the country where the junta, the ruling junta, originally comes from, even though they are ruling the country from the eastern part of the country, which is Port Sudan.
It sounds very much as though you think that this is a battle that's going to be won by the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and their assembled Arab militias that are joining the fray. Is that how you see it? Is the SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces?
I kind of disagree a little bit, Martin, with your categorization of it as Arab militia, because it started as an Arab militia in 2003, where they were called the Janjaweed, led by Musa Halal. But then once the RSF was institutionalized, it succeeded in using, the grievances of the people of the periphery to enlarge its base. So it's no longer Arab versus Zurga, whom we call as indigenous African tribes, but it's the people of the periphery. It is now the battle of the periphery against the center that has been manipulating the resources since 1956 and even before that.
But Walid, the independent reports of what's been happening in Darfur over the past year and a bit in the civil war have attested to massacres carried out across the region of Darfur by the RSF and its allies. And those massacres are against the indigenous people of Darfur, particularly the Zarqawa and others. Surely they don't have a lot of popular support on the ground in Darfur. At least it's certainly very divided.
I kind of agree with you, Patrick, completely here. They had RSF committed heinous crimes against the different tribes and indigenous groups. The RSF changed its conduct so many times, but I think they are, if we go back to the structural root of the problem, the software with which all the genocides in Sudan were committed was provided by the Riverian elite, who is now ideologized and Islamicized. In the southern part of the country, they have launched a jihadi campaign against the Sultanates, in which 2 million people were killed. I am more into investigating the structural root of the problem. It is the software that was provided by this Islamist group. But then I'm not going to exonerate, the RSF from crimes that they have committed. I'm just speaking about the general emotion of the people of the periphery. And if you speak about the Zaghawa represent only 2% of the population of Darfur. They have bigger volume than their size. And if you look at the Arabs, the nomads, I won't say the Arabs, the nomads, because if you look at me, I am an African black man, but I am characterized as an Arab. So I'm just saying that the nomads, they resemble about 60% of the population of Darfur, but it's no longer Darfur versus the center. You have Darfur, you have Kordofan, you have social Darfur. And by so saying, I mean Darfurians who were moved forcibly or voluntarily into the northern part of the country, the eastern part of the country, and the Midwest.
But this is a terrible tragedy, isn't it, Walid? Because after the revolution that overthrew Bashir's Islamist regime in 2019, so in 2019 I was there just after the revolution overthrew Bashir and the Islamist contraption he'd set up there. And one of the great things, talking to people in that massive protest camp around the armed forces headquarters, was so many people had come down from Darfur. They'd come from Blue Nile, from the other areas of the country, Kordofan, etc. They were gathering in Khartoum to try to work out a common future for the country. Now, what's happened to that movement now? Has it been lost completely because of this war? Or do you think most Sudanese people want to get back on that trajectory?
Yeah, I think, Patrick, you made an excellent remark here. That moment was, jeopardized. I won't say that it's totally gone, but I'm just saying that its potential has been thwarted by this war. I'm saying that both generals were not committed to the spirit of the revolution. But what aided them, what helped them mostly, Patrick, is the fact that the deep state was there, and Hamdouk was too weak to have influenced structural and institutional changes. So the whole revolution was more of a behavioral change, more of emotions that were waiting to be encapsulated and to be institutionalized. That didn't happen, unfortunately.
Walid, you said earlier that, to people who don't know much about Sudan, and I include myself in that category, it's often seen as a straightforward clash between the Arabs and the black people. And you said that some experts, you have a view that there is some kind of apartheid going on, and that some experts disagree with you. Why do they disagree?
I was speaking to a brilliant young man last night, and he is from the north, and he is saying that it's a clique, a group of gangsters led by Umar al-Bashir and the Islamists may have influenced change in the direction of creating a racist state, but that was not the direction of the Riverian northern elite at large. Because, and I do respect that point of view, because the Islamist regime, when they came, they fired about 150,000 from the civil service, and those were mainly Riverians coming from the north. So it was basically a difference of ideological difference that influenced the firing of those 150,000 from the civil service, including the army. So they have a point in the sense that rather than us blaming the past, why don't we move forward in the direction of Mandela and say that we are against the domination of the Riverian elite, we are against the domination of the Western elite. We want to create a nation for all citizens who have equal rights. And I think my disagreement with them comes from the fact that without properly understanding and dissecting the history, especially the economic history, you won't be able to even think of a constitution that will make everybody equal in the eyes of the republic at large.
Any chance of a brighter future?
Oh, there is a chance. We have to capitalize on the emotions and inspiration that was mentioned by Patrick. The young youth, they went beyond that north south dichotomy, secular versus religious, west versus north. They went beyond that because they were influenced by the social media, and they see South Korea, they see Indonesia, they see Singapore, and they say that we want somebody like Mahathir, somebody who doesn't speak about Sharia and mobilizes religious slogans, somebody who concentrates on development. And if you look at Sudan, there are 887 ladies every 100,000 who die while giving birth to children. So rather than us debating about a secular constitution, we should fix our thoughts and emotions on salvaging that population. If you look at the RSF, whom a greater percentage originate from my tribe. I was speaking in a podium about 10 years ago, and I said a catastrophe is about to happen because 90% of my tribal young men are dropouts. They dropped out of school, and the Riverian elites militarized the culture, impoverished the population. The result of which is what we see now in Khartoum and in Sudan at large. So we need to have a general debate that creates a secular constitution, and we can focus more, and we should be able to focus more on development. That's the way to go, because the rate of illiteracy now in Sudan is 56%. That is just speaking about illiteracy before getting into cultural degradation and issues that we as educated elites are not exempted from.
Waleed, thank you. You've given us a very good overview of the situation, the backstory, where we are now, and the possibility of a brighter future. So, Waleed Madibu, governance and international development expert. Right, to Nigeria now, and a curious case of MultiChoice, the entertainment provider that's being told by the Competition and Consumer Protection Tribunal that it must give its customers 1 month free, and is being fined 150 million naira, that's about $100,000. So to explain, we can talk now to the economist Kelvin Emmanuel, who's in the Nigerian capital, Abuja, not too far away from you, Donu, I would imagine. And as a MultiChoice customer, Donu, why don't you ask Kelvin what's going on?
Kelvin, I'm a MultiChoice customer, and what is this? Is it just a storm in a teacup? How does charging a rich company $100,000, which is chicken feed to them, how does this, what's the sort of significant impact of that? Sounds more like a gesture to me.
Well, it's a signal. It's a signal to the company. It's a signal to the market that they will not continue to enjoy monopoly in Nigeria.
And how is this playing by the rules? Is this legal?
I don't think it is legal. And the reason I don't think it's legal is because they said that MultiChoice to present their clients with a notice that they are going to raise prices. Look, it's a free market. It's not a socialist country where the government controls price. Okay? Moreover, in 2023, MultiChoice lost $49 million due to revaluation losses. Okay? Quite a number of multinationals in Nigeria have declared revaluation losses. Some of them have closed shop. The latest is Kimberly Clark, that produces Huggies Pampers, leaving Nigeria. They've had to downsize their factory in Lagos, and they're shutting down finally. So the challenges that MultiChoice faces, and the reason why I think they'll consider an acquisition, a compulsory takeover from Canal that's controlled by the Bolore family, is because the FX situation has gone bad. Naira has lost 92% of its value in the last decade. 92%. 92%. So it's affected the pricing of companies and the products. The government can't say that the customers are complaining, so you have to cap the price because it's a free market. The company is allowed to raise its price. It's the choice of the customers to either continue using the product or not. So it's completely ridiculous that the government will attempt to use the courts and say that the company didn't give enough notice to its customers to place sanctions like fining them $100,000 or asking them to give 1 month of free subscription to their customers. I think MultiChoice should fight it in court. They should go to the appeal court, which is a court of higher jurisdiction. I also think this is going to impact on the diplomatic ties, business ties between Nigeria and South Africa, the Nigeria and South Africa Business Council. There's been a lot of tension between Nigeria and South Africa. The exit of ShopRite, Retail Supermarkets Limited, that is owned by a South African businessman, was also like a watershed moment. And it was also because the exchange rate losses and devaluation led to them raising prices, and there was demand destruction, and it just didn't make sense for them to continue to see exchange rate losses and little or no profit from their business in Nigeria. Considering that they didn't see any future with the macroeconomic situation in the country. So I think that at the end of the day, MultiChoice might concede to selling off the canal, and the French will reorganize the play on how he wants to deal with that. Considering that right now France enjoys a very good diplomatic relationship with Nigeria.
Absolutely. What kind of message is it sending to prospective investors in Nigeria?
I think it's a terrible messaging, considering that the president and his team have been flying around the world looking for investors, especially non-speculative long-term investors. They were in Qatar. I think 2 months after they went to Qatar to ask for investments and for loan, the Qatari government, through the CEO of Qatar Gas, came and said that they were not interested in investing in Nigeria, and for good reason. In the same year when Total was working out modalities and were going into final investment decision, Nigerian government in their Finance Act came up with a new 30% levy on gas. So, and the CEO, the chairman of Total, said that the reason why investors are not coming to Nigeria is because there's lack of policy clarity for multi also want to invest in Nigeria. So you not playing by the rules and you using the power of state to go against a company and pretending that it's to protect consumers under the guise of protecting consumers, it doesn't kind of reassure investors about confidence in not, because it's easy to bring in money into any country. It's easy to get the money out. However, is a problem.
Kelvin, do you think that explains this crazy situation where European and American companies are desperate to buy in gas? Nigeria's got more gas than any other country in Africa, yet people are going to Senegal, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, you name it, starting up greenfield investments in those countries when Nigeria's got a functioning oil and gas industry. It seems like it's a massive contradiction.
It is a massive contradiction. So there's a difference, Patrick, between potential and reality. Nigeria has always been a country of potential. It never translates to reality. Gas LNG is at the highest. In fact, when the whole Russia and Ukraine started, LNG prices rose to the highest level that we've ever seen. The Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, came to Nigeria to look for gas. But the question is, do you actually have the infrastructure to trap the associated gas from wellheads, to pass it through pipes from flow station terminals, to separate it, to liquefy it, or to pipe it for pipe natural gas to transmit it to the companies that need it? The answer is no. So they have a situation where they have to pay penalties to the companies that they've signed for sales agreements with, to get off the requirement of you not delivering based on the contracts that has been signed. That's the problem Nigeria has. And you just have so much lack of policy clarity that is chasing investors away. I want you to look at it this way. 10 years ago, a dollar was trading at 155. So the premium subscription of 50 US dollars, for example, was anywhere around 8,000 naira. Yeah. Today, dollar is trading at 1,500. A premium subscription of 50, the same 50 US dollars, for example, is 75,000 naira. MultiChoice is not even charging based on the exchange rates level, comparison over time. They're still, last year they ran at $30 million of net profit, no, $30 million of net loss. Yeah. $49 million in revaluation losses from FX. Yeah. So the blame should be on the government.
Can I jump in on the multi-choice issue, Calvin? And finally, I'd like to ask you one question. It's been suggested that this order for multi-choice to give all subscribers a 1 month's free service starting this month is in order to coincide with the UEFA European Football Championships, which would assuage some of the restlessness that is being experienced in Nigerian society. You've had strikes, you've got a cost of living crisis, people are demonstrating. So is this a government really trying to appease a restless public by giving them a month's free football?
The government cannot appease the public and score cheap political points at the expense of a private company with investors. You can't score cheap political points at the expense of a foreign company that has shareholders. It's ridiculous.
But Kelvin, is that what the government is trying to do?
I don't know if that's what they are trying to do. From all indications, it suggests that it's a diversionary tactic. But I think it's a very negative signal to foreign investors who the government is cutting so seriously to bring in capital into the country.
Kelvin Emmanuel, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. That's it for this edition of Africa Here and Now. If you want to hear more of our conversations, there's our website, www.AfricaHere&NOW.com. We're available on all major audio platforms, as well as on your smart speaker. Just ask it to find Africa Here and Now podcast. And of course, we're on YouTube. Follow us on the socials, Instagram and Facebook. I'm on X at Martine Dennis. Get in touch. We recorded this on Monday, June the 10th, 2024. Our producer is Anne Busby. Our original music is by Enric Adam. Charlie Panton and Tevin Sudi put it all together. Our thanks to our guests, Oyama, Walid and Kelvin, from Donu, Patrick and me. Thank you for your company.